I'm Lana Turner, and I was born in New York City. I'd like to say Harlem, because it was at 110th Street at Women's Hospital, which is where it used to be, where I was born. And I'm the first of 6 children of Lee and Ida Turner. Both of my parents were born in Georgia. They met in West Palm Beach, Florida. And they were together in 1937 and made their home in Harlem at that time. So they enjoyed a very interesting life, only in as much as by day they worked as a chauffeur and cook or chambermaid, but by evening they would put on those formal clothes, gowns and gloves, and like so many other people in Harlem would go out and socialize and, define themselves by who they really were. And they were a part of that time. They didn't superimpose it on any of us, but because there were so many lovely photographs, and my father's music was always something I loved, I certainly just took after him. So I always get dressed, I always go out dancing, and I just love the music. So it's a direct inheritance. That and living in Harlem, which is where I live. I run an art gallery. I have done things like, sell real estate. Many people will know that. But I also created things that I would do. For example, I created an event called Men Who Cook. And that was created specifically to fund an art school that my son at the time was going to. It became a big deal on its own terms. I would ask men, didn't matter who they were, to prepare something that they would love to serve. And they did. The numbers grew from, it being in my apartment from 4 or 5 guys to, I guess at the end, several hundred people, including, some restaurants, some cooking schools. But it became a big deal, and it was one of those, I think, moments in time that just seemed to bring so many people together. And it was also the sort of thing that people figured, well, she could do that, she could do other things. So I went on to produce other events that I was asked to do. They tended to be primarily political type events. So dinners for then Mayor Dinkins. I produced Mandela at Yankee Stadium by default. So I walked in the office one day and Jim Bell said, "Lana, this event belongs to you." And I thought, oh dear. Well, I'd never done a stadium-size event before. I've done many things, but I had never done that. But you fly by the seat of whatever you know. And most of what I do, I think, over time has always been about making something out of nothing. I think that's part of the heritage of just being black, I guess. Just making something out of nothing. You don't stop and think about what to do. You just analyze it quickly and you get ready to do it. I am a doer. I can not only process and think about things, but I can also do things, and I'm not afraid to do it. And so that's how that would come about. And I think that other challenges in my life, whether they are things that people can understand, i.e. selling a house and real estate, or things that they really can't understand, how I can assemble, I don't know, maybe something that I wore, and they think, oh, well, did you buy this way or something? And for me, it's always a process. The process starts out, well, what is the question? Or what am I trying to solve or resolve? So that's how I've gotten to do that. I've gone on to create a business, an archival business. I am someone who has collections of things. And I've always maintained the ability to not only keep them, but to use them, and understand it as an option. But being able to put things together that become, I think, more of a canvas for art, for style, not just what I wear, but how I live. And so it permeates everything I do. My mother turned 100 this year, and I've decided to try and create a document that, yes, at the center of it encapsulates her life, I think, but broader, it really does speak to all of the, what I would think of the context of a life. And not just the context of that life as it began, but the context of the life in which it's a continuous stream. What, I think, why does my grandfather leave under the cover of night? I got that question solved, you know, he was going to be killed or lynched or something. I got that part. But what makes him go all the way to Florida instead of going north or going west? The literature talks so much about the Underground Railroad that would allow us to travel north. But there was a Southern Underground Railroad. And I did not understand this until I started working ostensibly on just trying to celebrate my mother's 100th birthday. And that's because I had all these questions and I'm trying to understand where the answers are. And so to get to a place like Jupiter, I'm trying to understand, you know, these are unlettered people. They're unlettered, they don't have any money. So I'm wondering, you know, how do you get there? I mean, it's one thing to say he left Blakely, Georgia, and he ended up in Jupiter, Florida. But we're talking about 1924. I'm not talking about somebody who bought a ticket and got on a train. He had to leave under the cover of night. Okay. He is fleeing with at least my mother, who is 9 years old, and I understand a baby. They don't own anything. There's no horse, there's no wagon, and there's no money. Not really. Right. So how do they do this? And that's how I understood something about the Underground Railroad. I didn't know this before. There are Seminoles who are still there. And somehow this Underground Railroad allowed my grandfather to get to Jupiter. There are many places you could hide in before Jupiter, Florida. How they manage that is amazing. And I think that when we understand things about ourselves or our history, it's nice to put everything in a nice, tidy little sentence. But we're not really thinking about, well, what did you eat? And what were they wearing? And what could you run with? And did you have shoes? And the only connection I had to any of this was at my mother's celebration, and my youngest brother said, oh yeah, well, you know, Grandpa used to mention the Seminole Indians. Well, he'd never mentioned it to me. I never knew anything about it, never heard of any connection before my brother just happened to make that one sentence. I recently did the DNA test to find out where my mother's line comes from in Africa. And I got those results back. And now I'm putting my other relatives to the test so I can try to figure out some of the other branches. But this research is taking me there. So I am actually going to go it's Equatorial Guinea, so I am actually going to go. I am going to go to Georgia to pick cotton, because I need to understand what that was about, what it feels like. I mean, it's one thing to know it, it's another thing to read it, another thing to understand its absolute misery through literature. But what does it really mean? I mean, have I actually done it? No, I haven't, so I am going. I've made arrangements to do that. I want to go on the river. I want to see what I see. I'm not sure what I'm looking for. I want to walk in places that were just farms. Didn't have to be, you know, I have names of slaveholders and just a name and a sentence. How much of that can I find in a census or a courthouse? Maybe something, maybe nothing, but I'm willing to do that. I am going to go to places that I've only heard of or I see in a photograph, to feel what I feel about it. So it's a project that has everything to do with what that means. Now the project talks about Africa, talks about slavery, talks about Civil War, talks about Seminoles, the Black Seminoles, talks about the history of Georgia and Florida, talks about politics. But it also talks about moving to New York. The story comes to Harlem, and photographs that I could see of them in all of these clubs and places, Savoy Ballroom and that sort of thing. But it talks about what was around them, what did they see, what were they doing. But I wrote down snatches of things when I was younger, when I would go and visit my mother, and not so much my father, but I would ask, the aunts. And I have just these little snippets of things where apparently I've always been curious. And I always save those little snippets of paper. And they're always filed under what they should be filed under. And even today, here I am in my 60s. I must have started this when I was in my 20s. I have all these little snippets of paper that I'd been writing little notes on. Little would I know that at this moment, all those little snippets of paper are really important to me. It doesn't matter what it could be just 2 words. But there were 2 words that I know that I could use because I got it from somebody right at that moment. All of the people are gone. So I'm using little breadcrumbs to put the story together. So it's a story that starts out by imagining, I'm celebrating my mother being 100, but essentially I'm celebrating everybody because it's everybody's story.